This hangout. Okay, we're live, and today we have a very special guest for our campaign to end the violence, end the silence of domestic violence, and our campaign www.seedthebooks.org. It is my special honor and privilege to have Anutza Bellisimo on the show, and let me just give you a little bit more information of Anutza and her credentials. She is the CEO and executive coach at the Stress and Anger Management Institute. She is also #1 international best-selling author of The Highly Effective Executive. First and foremost, she is an extraordinary executive career coach and soft skills facilitator. Anutza is also a seminar leader, speaker, and trusted consultant for busy executive, respected leaders, and business owners. As a certified anger management facilitator, she founded the Stress and Anger Management Institute, also known as SAMI, in Manhattan Beach, California in 2005, and she created the SAMI Pillow, the original stress and anger management tool. She was the host of SAMI Radio in LA and is the author of A Woman's Guide to Transforming Anger and Stress into Personal Power and Success. And the reason why I have Anutza on the show today is because as we all know that anger is a huge predominant factor, of course, in domestic violence. So we're going to uncover what anger is. But before we start, Anutza, why don't you just tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Thanks. Thank you for having me here, Justine. I hope you can hear me. And, you said a lot. You shared a lot, so thank you for that. That was a perfect introduction. But as you mentioned, in 2005, I founded the Stress and Anger Management Institute, and it was actually with the intention of helping to minimize domestic violence in families, to bring about the portion of anger management, because I grew up in a household where domestic violence was present. And so when I learned about anger management and became certified, I thought to myself, wow, how would it have changed my family or my life had my parents taken a course like this or known about anger management? I don't think that it was, very common back then, but I just felt that if I could help other families not experience what I had gone through, that was really my intention. But what happened was I created the SAMI Pillow in a way to help establish a foundation for communication. And it really took off, and what I found was it wasn't as popular as I'd hoped it would be with families. It actually became very popular with corporate and executive clientele. So I went with the flow, and I continued that path for many years, and I find myself going full circle because here I am back at the process of integrating the work so that it can help individuals and families really unwind and relieve some of the pressures that create anger and that can move into a domestic type of violence situation if it's not handled correctly.
I caught that because I saw your interview with Jen Foster when you were talking about your book that just came out, and I just thought, it really relates to part of the issues of what we're dealing with the whole abuse and domestic violence, and that's why I asked you on. So I'm glad we were able to tie that all together.
Thank you. I'm glad you caught that. It's not, I mean, I sense that you have a good radar for connecting people and conversations and causes.
Yeah, so I know that in your bio also you talk about how you want to inspire leadership, and that can cultivate extraordinary human potential. And The only reason I bring that out is because when people are abused, you know, and anger is all in there, we can't reach that human potential. We're stuck. We're stuck when there's anger and abuse, right?
Correct. Of course, I think that we all have this potential within us. And at one point in time, it just became buried. Um, it happens so much in, you know, as it relates to domestic violence, because I know that's the connection that we're using here today, but it happens so much. And it so often begins in childhood where digs and put downs and hurtful things and even evil and ugliness will happen to individuals, and it buries that spirit, and it covers the light, so to speak, is what I call it, that we all have within us. And so I see that, you know, one of the common threads I found in my practice is, although individuals were being sent in from organizations, it always started at home. It always started at home, and there was something underlying at home in the relationships that wasn't being handled, and it was showing up at work.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just seething through, and there's no way to hide it when there's that amount of conflict, internal, external. And so my focus with individuals is to really inspire them and help them engineer action plans and ways to bring back what's already inside and ready available that they've just lost access of. It's already there. It's almost like, you know, a pool, and you're just trying to grasp that one piece that keeps floating away. But there's so many components of it, and it's already there. We just need to, most of us just need someone to believe in us, someone to support us, and the most important piece is to hold us accountable for our own greatness.
Exactly. And my previous interview with Dr. Neal, at the very end of the interview, I talked about being accountable, being responsible for your actions. In the end, at the end of the day, each of us are responsible for each choice that we make. And
Right.
you know, I understand the whole thing that when somebody batters you and constantly angry at you, it can turn inward into an inward anger. So we're going to address the issue of anger. So one of the first things I want to ask is, what is anger? I mean, we pretty much know, but I guess you're going to come at it from a psychological or emotional standpoint.
Yes, I'll get into what is anger and what is anger management and the distinction between the two. So let's talk about, first off, we want to address what is the anger. So because anger is never the problem. It's the byproduct, you know, the side effect of what's happening underneath. But anger is a natural response to perceived threats. Think about this. It causes your body to release adrenaline, your muscles to tighten, and your heart rate and blood pressure to increase, right? Your senses might be more acute, and your face may flush, and your hands or your palms may sweat, things like that. However, anger becomes a problem only when it's not managed in a healthy way. So I was interviewed by the History Channel, and there was a documentary called The Seven Deadly Sins, and it aired for a couple of years in a row. I was surprised, but the process of this documentary and the idea of it was to say, what's the purpose of anger? Can we get rid of anger? Should we get rid of anger? How do we deal with anger? All these questions about, you know, sin and anger, and then our culture and anger, and our emotions, and how anger is useful or beneficial or not, the cost of anger. And, you know, I noticed that if you try to scare someone into not being angry, like, oh, it's going to affect your health, and oh, it'll, you know, there's all these reasons, you know, it's not a good idea to be angry. I don't necessarily believe that it's not a good idea to be angry. I believe anger is a signal. It is a red flag that sends, just like when we're hungry, you know, we get the signal to our brain, hey, I'm hungry. Or when we're tired, we get the signal and say, hey, it's time to go to sleep. So anger is the signal that says we are out of alignment. There's something in your relationship, in your environment, in yourself that is out of integrity to your core values. So I want you to look at anger from that direction.
It's not just physiological, it's the emotional. And then what you're saying is that we can take this, like you just mentioned some physiological things, like when we're hungry, we eat. When we're tired, we sleep. When we're angry, that's when you have to recognize it. I think what I'm getting to is that we're so used to having a knee-jerk reaction and just lashing out instead of recognizing it and I guess learning how to diffuse it. Is that what it is?
Well, no, what I'm saying is anger is a signal. It's your emotional response, your physical response. The way that you get angry is your red flag. It's your signal saying to you that your relationship or your decisions or whatever it may be that's triggering that experience is out of integrity to your core values. So not only is it just this a natural response to a perceived threat, that idea that your body comes into, whether you should fight or flight, stay or go, you know, something's there that's creating that trigger. So anger is a gift. It's a sign.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
Okay. It's a gift. It's a blessing. It really is, because it's meant to tell you. It's just like, you know, the nervous system. If you cut yourself or if you hurt yourself, something has to deliver the message to your brain. Hey, you cut yourself and you're bleeding.
Exactly.
You need to take care of that. Get
Right.
it?
Yeah,
So
I got it
anger
now.
is the same thing. Yes, that is, you know, your gift, God's gift to you, I believe, to say, hey, you need to make some changes here.
Okay, so
That's
if we
your,
look
that's
at
your trigger.
that's looking at it from what I see as a healthy perspective, and like you were saying, you know, people are telling you not to be angry when actually it's for our protection as a warning.
It's a warning.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah. So that's how I see anger. When someone asks me, so what is anger? I say it's a warning signal. It's a signal that says danger, danger. Something's out of alignment. Something's not right for you. Beware. Pay attention.
But that would stem on what your belief system is, right? Whatever angers you is out of what your belief system is.
Right. We all have our own core values, our own belief system.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And whether you were brought up in a abusive home or a non-abusive home, a home, you know, in relationships that were healthy, we all have our own personal standards and values. So we want to pay attention to that, because sometimes we get into experiences or relationships that are out of alignment with our true core beliefs. And maybe we're doing something to ourselves or in relationships that are not in alignment with who we truly are, but we're doing it for the other person. And sometimes we don't even know that we're doing it until we're in such uprooted conflict and internal or external, and that anger shows up, but we don't understand. You know, sometimes most people will let it go way too far, especially in domestic violence situations.
I think now would be a good time to segue into the next question, because now we're talking about it getting out of hand. So the next question is, what is the cost of anger?
So, you know, although anger can be a positive, okay, at times, more frequently, it leads to harmful consequences. So when anger isn't managed properly, when it's not used as a signal, then we need to look at, you know, its extreme form, because it can result in things like road rage, domestic violence, child abuse, physical assault, and even murder. Okay. So that's
But
what we
that's
want to,
very extreme. Yeah.
right. But those are the costs of anger. I mean, everything from child abuse. I mean, how many times has someone seen in the mall a parent lose control of their temper because they're so stressed, they become angry and take it out on their child and hit their child? Like, I've seen that happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too.
How many, right. How many times do you see people lose control in their car and, you know, run around, almost cause an accident, try to cut the other person off, try to get their attention? I mean, these are extreme cases. This is when you're unable to manage the anger that you're feeling.
Right, right. And so the next one is a polar opposite. What are the benefits of anger? And I think we covered that. It's for our protection. It makes us alert. You know, all the signals go off. So when it's for our benefit, what would you say those situations would be?
Well, hold on a
When
second. I actually have a couple things to add
okay,
to what the cost of anger. So there's
okay,
different areas. So cost number one is to your health, right? So it's been documented that chronic anger, and I just released a video on this, where women who are in relationships that are painful and unhealthy relationships, they're at a much higher risk for heart attacks and stroke. So if you're in an unhealthy relationship, you're basically setting yourself up for a heart attack or a stroke. Like, you just don't, it's not a matter of yes, if, it's a matter of when.
yeah, because you know it's shocking how it's not publicly made aware as there's a lot of women that actually we think it's a man's thing, but really there's a lot of women that go through heart attacks too.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
And I mean, men also see it, obviously, but women are at higher risk. Like, it affects them twice as much as it does the man. So it's much more dangerous for a woman to be in an unhealthy relationship than it is a man.
Yeah, that's interesting.
They're exposed to higher risk.
Right.
Number two, the cost is to your self-esteem. So although the expression of anger may feel good for a moment, and a lot of men really thrive sometimes on that feeling of releasing the anger, it often leads to feelings of guilt, shame, embarrassment, and remorse. So on a cognitive level, you know, one might realize that the response was blown out of proportion, you know, but it really affects our self-esteem.
Oh yeah.
And it lowers our self-esteem. So these are all the things that are happening as you're allowing yourself to become angry over and over again. A lot of people, like myself, use anger. Anger was my fuel. Like, I really used anger because that was the main, that was my, really, I would say, my first language. That was the main language spoken in my house growing up. Like, communication, not an option. It was either, you know, conversations of stress or anger. It was one of the two. And nothing about being assertive or compassionate or kind or loving was ever part of that. So for me, the only thing I knew was one opposite. So extreme happiness, optimism, joy, or anger, pain, and frustration. There's never any happy medium.
I know. I think in a lot of cases when it comes to abuse of any kind, the child abuse, growing up in that environment, as well as, you know, spousal abuse, there seems to be a polar opposite. There's never a happy medium, and I think that's what a lot of people are missing is they don't know how to come to that happy medium where you don't have to be extremely angry and abusive. You don't, and on the other side, you don't. Everything is like, you know, you have this high for a little bit. Then you go back to the anger. There's no this, you probably come across that where you have to deal with this polar opposite.
Yeah. And I guess I can attribute that to my extreme optimism. Yeah, because, you know, when everything was good, it's all good. It's very good. It's just good.
Mm-hmm.
But when it was bad, it was very bad.
Yeah.
And so The cost also is to your relationship. So very few things damage a relationship like one's inability to manage anger. It becomes an environment for fear, an environment of, where there's lack of trust, because when someone is angry, they're unpredictable.
Mm-hmm.
And not everyone gets violent when they become angry, but of course they get aggressive.
Right.
And, intense outbursts of anger and frustration can be dangerous. It just destroys relationships. Physically, verbally, there's so many ways that it breaks apart families.
And there's also the silent seething anger, where it's a silent anger, and that can be just as scary.
That the passive anger, yeah, it is. It can be very scary. In fact, it's much scarier to be within the mystery of it, not know what someone's thinking, not know when they're going to blow up, not know what they're planning. And it's used for control and manipulation as well. But there's, it shows up in the cost to your children, our children, and the effects of them witnessing chronic and intense anger really is devastating to their spirit, to their self-esteem. And, it's constantly brought up when I've worked with a lot of court orders and anger management, where there's a divorce or a separation, there's children involved. One or both parents are typically sent to anger management when it's that type of scenario. It's just very common. And then, of course, it shows up in the workplace. We've all heard of the workplace bully, someone who's had some desk rage, things like that. I mean, it affects productivity. And it's just, there's so many ways that it breaks down the workplace. Friendships, relationships, all of that creates separation and loneliness. There's just so much to be said for that.
So it's just like a domino effect. It starts with the person not managing their anger, and it affects the spouse, to the children, and to the workplace, to the workforce. So that's how important it is to manage it.
It is. And when I say manage it, it's not as if the last thing I want people to think that anger management is some type of program to teach you to never become angry. That's not healthy either.
Yeah, I think stuffing things in is not a good thing, because you're going to explode.
Right. And, so there are benefits to anger. We could talk about that.
Yeah, let me see. We were talking about, what is anger management? That's the next question.
Oh, okay. I thought we were on the benefits. Okay, hold on. So what is anger management? So here's the deal. Most people consider anger management to be psychotherapy. They think that anger management is, the movie. So there's a therapist, and the therapist is pushing your buttons to see how angry you could get. It's not like the movies, and it's not psychotherapy. Anger management is considered psychoeducation. The Board of Psychology says that, anger is a skill, a mismanaged skill. So we can fix this through coping skills. And that's really the most successful experience. I mean, I have physicians coming to me saying, how do we manage this? And anger management is made up of 3 things. It's really simple: stress management, emotional intelligence, and interpersonal communication skills. That's what anger management is. 3 topics. So it's very cut and dry if you think about it, but it's also very in-depth, because those 3 subjects are very deep and dear to us, and they can create success for us, or it can damage our relationships. 85% of your career success is based on your soft skills. And soft skills is made up of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is part of anger management. So empathy skills, how are you able to relate to others? How are you able to associate yourself and put yourself in someone else's shoes to empathize with that person? How are you able to manage your stress when you're under stress? How do you communicate when you're stressed? I mean, it's really easy to be relaxed if there's nothing going on and you're at home, there's no stressors, there's no triggers, you know, but when you're in the heat of the moment, how do you manage yourself? That's what anger management is.
Yeah, and then I think a lot of the people that are the perpetrators of the abuse, they have those episodes of blind anger where there's no thinking involved. Because you said emotional intelligence is a key factor, where these perpetrators just don't have that in them, or they refuse to learn, or nobody's ever told them there's an alternative way, because that's what they saw as a child.
Right.
They grew up seeing people blowing up and hitting or yelling, screaming, breaking things, and so that's a long road to go, you know, to help people turn around and say, hey, you have this emotional intelligence. There's a different way to handle this. You don't have to be in this blind rage all the time when something sets you off.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, there are characteristics, anger management from domestic abuse and batterer's profile compared to an individual with an anger management profile.
Mm-hmm. Let me see. Okay, so here's a good question. How does anger management differ from domestic abuse counseling?
Well, some characteristics that fit a general profile for a batterer are a batterer objectifies women. He doesn't see women as people. He doesn't respect women as a group. Overall, he sees women as a property or sexual object. And obviously this can, you know, apply to men and women because they are both. A batterer has low self-esteem and feels powerless and ineffective in the world, like in their relationships, at their work, constantly, you know, the victim. They may appear successful on the outside, but on the inside, they really feel inadequate. So they spend a lot of time hiding that, covering that, using different, you know, objects and things and people, relationships, whatever it is, to hide that. A batterer externalizes the causes of his behavior. So he blames his violence on the circumstances, such as, I'm so stressed out, you made me do this, you know, your behavior made me hurt you, I had a bad day, oh, it was just the alcohol, it'll never happen again.
Right, right. And I bring this up in the campaign a lot, is that the perpetrator will make the abused person feel that it's their fault. And then so after a while, that manipulation and control, that person really believes it. So I think I brought this up in our conversation outside of the interview, that because of this, the person will have anger toward themselves, which is really unhealthy, right? They're already taking on the anger from somebody else, and then because now they're they're brought to, to believe that it is their fault. Because at one time I did. I mean, I really thought it was my fault that was setting him off and him being violent and hitting me. So then there's inward anger. What would you say to people in that situation where they've turned it on themselves? They got two enemies now, themselves and the perpetrator.
You know, you have to gauge that. You have to be aware that you can be your own worst enemy. And it's, I think, you know, I don't want to go on a tangent about this, but I believe in my circumstance, it came from the fact that I was raised in a very controlling and manipulating environment. So I didn't know, I didn't have a reference for a healthy relationship, a healthy experience. So I mean, no clue. The only thing I could think of was, oh, this is how it's supposed to be, that, like the way I see it on TV. That's the good way. That was my only point of reference. So when I look at the fact that, you know, growing up under such manipulative and controlling circumstances, what is my second nature, like just natural response, is to look for someone who is that way without even knowing that they're that way or that I'm doing that.
I found that out through my own therapy. My first therapist said that we're a perfect match, and I didn't understand what in the world is he talking about. This guy is so mean to me. What are you saying, that I deserve it? And then so we went back into the childhood, how you grew up. I mean, it really stems that early, and that's why I think this campaign is so crucial to outreach to young people so that we can break that cycle. They don't bring it into their adulthood, you know, which is a really big task in itself. But awareness is key, right, Anutza? I mean, that's the first step.
It is, you know, breaking the chains of bondage is what I call it.
Exactly.
Breaking the chains of bondage. And I have to be responsible for myself and responsible to shed the light for other individuals to break those chains of bondage, because that's the only power that I have, is to help individuals realize that, you know what, a batter may be pleasant and charming between the periods, you know, the episodes of violence, but you know, they're often seen as the nice guy. They're the nice guy. Are you kidding? I would never see them do that. They're such a nice guy, or they're such a nice girl. But the behavioral warning signs of a potential batter include extreme jealousy. So you want to look for that.
Huge possessiveness.
Possessiveness, a bad temper, unpredictability, cruelty to animals even, or verbal abusiveness. And I think verbal abusiveness is one that people let slide way too often.
Yes.
It's let go way too often. It's made light of, oh, they're just being funny. Oh, they don't know how to communicate. You know what? That's the sign. Get out.
Yeah. Truly believe in that.
When someone is making light of you, when you know, that shows a lot about their personality. And I think, you know, we let that slide. We just let it slide and slide. And before we know it, we're so deep. And we have children involved, and then it's a whole other episode of being stuck.
Right.
So individuals with anger management issues, they tend to be dealing with more explosive or out of control anger, right? Like they just get angry due to like distorted thinking. Maybe they like snowball things. We call it the snowball effect. Like they put all the negative thoughts together.
That's a good way to put it. Distorted, because you know, just trivial things will set them off, and you don't even know what those are. It's like a booby trap.
Right.
You're going about your day, and you're with an abusive partner, and you're walking on eggshells. Dr. Neil and I talked about it in a previous interview. It's walking on eggshells. You know, just when you think you're safe, something very trivial, like you said, it'll be delusional. It'll be that word that you use. And then they'll just explode. So you're constantly in that warfare kind of mindset. Like, do I have to be ready to like run, or you know, just get ready for the hand to come swinging at me? You know what I mean?
But the difference is, though, even though they generally, you know, can get explosive or angry, they will take responsibility for their behavior once they're confronted with it. Once they are dealing with the consequences. Batterers will not, and it will take much longer for them to take responsibility. Okay? So, you know, there's some good ways to handle anger. You know, you can look at it.
The next question, what is the best way to handle it?
You can look at it three ways. You can express it, you can suppress it, or you can address it in a calming nature. So expressing it, you know, is when there's a violent outburst. You're just you know, you're not responding, you're reacting. Suppressing it, so this is the people that they really, they hold it in, and then they just lose it. Like they just hold it in way too often. They're constantly suppressing their emotion. They're not, you know, communicating with you. You just can't get much out of these people.
We got kind of frozen here, so we're just gonna wait for Anutza to come back. Can you hear me, Anutza? So we're just gonna wait a little bit here, and as she comes back, we're going to address when is professional help needed. Of course, you know, when somebody is that explosive, they're probably stubborn. So you know, in my eyes, if someone is in that situation, go get help for yourself. The thing that I've learned is that you can't change someone, you can't love someone enough that they will change. The person that is responsible for change is each individual. And that's something that was a hard lesson for me to learn, is that I just thought if I was kind enough, loving enough, and bent over backwards enough, that'll calm that person down. But that's their issue, not yours. And so at the end of the day, it's if you can't change that person, you can go find help for yourself. And it looks like Anutza got cut off here, so we're going to give it a little bit longer, and then if she doesn't return, I think we got a lot of valuable information about anger. I know for some of you thinking that this is not a huge, you know, something that needs to be talked about, but this is the root of all the abuse, is the anger, and managing it, and also realizing that it's a learned behavior. And that's why it's so important to reach the young people to you know, break that cycle. So Anutza is back, and Anutza is back, and I was just yeah, I was just talking about how everyone at the end of the day cannot change someone. You know, they only can change themselves if they find themselves in a situation. They can't love someone enough or be nice enough to change that person. Everybody is responsible for their own selves, and so
That's true.
that's where I ended it, where at the end of the day, when you are in this relationship, you know, you only can get, the statistics show that there has to be 7 occurrences, really bad ones, before someone leaves an abusive relationship, whether it's a guy or a gal, for many different reasons, and we kind of covered that with Dr. Neal. But as far as what the last question is, when is professional help needed? At what point?
I'm
Because I know
sorry, I lost my connection. First of all, let me apologize for that. I'm not sure
that's okay.
what
That's
happened.
okay. We got it.
I'm glad we're back. I was laughing because I was like, I couldn't believe it. So speaking of professional help, learning to control anger is a challenge for everyone at times, okay? It's a good idea to seek help if you are clear or people are telling you that they want you to get help. They are not in communication with you the way they used to be because they're fearful. If you need support and structure, making changes is always the perfect time to seek professional help. But when someone is hurting those around you, it's time. Like, it's time for them to get help. And when anger is taking its toll on your relationship, it's time to get help. And I think that if you find yourself feeling angry all the time, that's number one. I always ask people that. Do you find yourself feeling angry all the time? That's really the time to really get the help that you need.
Do this because I've been to both psychologists who can prescribe things and psychologists. Psychiatrists can prescribe medications. Psychologists are able to coach you and perhaps go to your general practitioner and have them prescribe something to you. And then there's people like you who just specialize in anger management. What would you say to the person who wants to now say, you know what, I can't change my abusive partner, but I noticed that I've changed so dramatically. I'm angry all the time. Who should they reach out to? Should they go to psychologists, psychiatrists, specialists? What would you say?
Well, here's the deal. Because anger management is not psychotherapy, if you think you need psychotherapy, then you can see a psychotherapist and an anger management specialist. It's important that people understand that if there is no curriculum, if there is no workbook, it's not anger management, it's psychotherapy.
Oh, now,
And
before you go further, do you think both go hand in hand, or because I think, you know, uncovering, a lot of people just don't realize, because I didn't in my mid-20s when I started discovering that everything is rooted in your childhood most of the time, and that we need to visit that period in your life to figure out why. So do you think they go hand in hand, or is that covered in anger management?
no, see, going back to your childhood is certainly psychotherapy. There's nothing you do about it. Sure, it's great to know, like, you know, where it came from, but most people are pretty aware of where anger showed up in their life as a child. I have found a lot of people will go to psychotherapy and spend years in psychotherapy, finally leave psychotherapy, come to anger management, and they are disappointed that they didn't come in sooner because they wanted the skill set. I noticed that a lot of
I see
therapists,
the difference. Yeah, they don't help you with that skill set. It's not a learned thing, so they
right,
have to actually learn it.
right, it's a skill set. And, you know, I include things like biofeedback. That's really important, where someone can understand their levels of stress, what their body does, how they're reacting, how to minimize that, how to help reframe situations in everyday life. And so in anger management, it comes in 3 levels. A level 1 is 12 hours, which is typically a 12-week program. A level 2 is about 26, and a level 3 is about 52, okay? So that's the standard. And it's done that way because it takes at least 30 days to get familiar and understand the work. Another 30 days to start implementing it, really start tweaking it and saying, okay, does this work for me? And then another 30 days to try to really master that. That's the basics. That's the smallest amount of time we can provide someone to support them in the change process. Most people will go to a level 2, level 3, because it depends on how long they've had these issues and how severe it is. But if there isn't a workbook, if there's no homework, if there's not a weekly appointment where you are following up with homework, following up with your workbook, bringing in your results, that is not anger management, that is psychotherapy. So you need to be clear of the two. A lot of people will say, oh yeah, I do anger management, but they don't provide a workbook, there's no didactic exercises, there's no homework, none of that. And that's anger management. Think of anger management as, the closest thing I could relate it to is driving school. So you go and you learn the skills, you practice them in your everyday life, you come back, you learn the skills. In anger management, you practice it in your everyday life, you come back, and you need to work those skills for a certain amount of time.
Yeah, so that it becomes second nature to replace what you've been doing, that knee-jerk reaction to react.
Right.
It replaces that, but like you said, yeah, it takes a lot of discipline and a lot of time, but I think if people are serious enough to change their lives, they'll go ahead and do it for the sake of their own well-being as well as their children, so that they can be a model, hopefully, to show their children that they don't have to stay that way. There is change if you really want the change.
Yeah, we're all capable of change. And, you know, my mentor, John Assaraf, really gets into the dynamics of change and how we refuse change. And I always implement that type of information into my program so that people can understand what's actually happening when they begin to resist the change. So like, you know what, I was doing really good and now I'm angry again. What's happening with me? Does it just not work? It just doesn't work for me. But no, that's not the case. It's just the brain is refusing to change. It wants to use the least amount of energy. It wants to get quick results, and it wants to keep you safe. So even if safe means being in an unhealthy relationship, a violent relationship, it's a comfort zone. You have to move yourself past that comfort zone.
It's so crazy. It's you have to become uncomfortable with the comfortable that's making you uncomfortable. It's such a weird dynamic, but because it's what a lot of people know, they would rather stay in it. And so I would say that for those who, are victimized by abusers, that they have to change their mindset, that they're not victims anymore. That, I think that's where it starts too as well, right, Anutza, about how your mindset is, how you actually see yourself, right? Because if you've been manipulated so long, and and rightly so, you think you're the victim, and but then you're stronger than you think, and that you can bring yourself out of that, and that's by being aware and educating yourself, reaching out to anger management. Now, a lot of anger management, such as yourself, are you all over the country? Are you certified? How do you reach out and look for someone who can
Well, you
help
want
you?
to look for a certified anger management facilitator, a CAMF. And you
Okay.
want to look for someone who offers flexible plans. So I offer programs, whether you're in person, on site, or online. You're going to get the results if you show up for the program. It works when you work it. You've heard of that one, right? It works when you work it.
Exactly.
So
Like anything
yeah,
else.
exactly. So it doesn't matter if you're online. I have so many people who are, at first resistant to taking the course online, and they don't understand, you're still meeting face to face with your facilitator. You're still doing the homework. You're still working through your workbook. The only thing is you don't have to drive in and out of your appointment.
So
So,
do you do like Skype? Do you do Skype or things like that?
Skype, go to meeting. I use Visita personally because that's my program that I use through the business. But yeah, you can use any of that where you're actually seeing someone and they show up every week for that appointment and they have results, or they share that there are things that I meant to accomplish but did not. And, here's how it's affecting me. Are we stuck? Do we need to move through that? How do we, reframe our goals and action plan? But it really is important that you get support. I think when we isolate, when we're in situations like that, we isolate ourselves, and that tends to be the most common scenario, is that you're isolated. Someone is isolated, and then they're not able to get the help that they need,
Right, right. hmm And
and they're afraid of change.
they're afraid of change, and they're afraid of their abuser as well. But it gets to the point where you're just sick and tired of being sick and tired. And
Yeah.
I've as a domestic abuse survivor myself, and I've been talking to a couple of them who have experienced something, situations way more severe. Like I have this one young lady who was being abused, and she was battling breast cancer, and he still abused her. So,
Wow.
and then she finally got out, and her son asked her, "What took you so long, Mom?" Because she was in the hospital. He put her in the hospital. So the son
Mm.
finally said, "What took you so long?" So I'm going to bring these survivors on because I want them to be a voice for others to hear that, while it's scary to get away from the abuser, there is a way to do it. But if you don't, the alternative is devastating for them and their
Yeah.
kids, especially because the kids, one gal said, well, one lady said that she knows that her sons are abusive to their wives because it was learned at home. And so,
Yeah.
do
And
you
there's
find? Yeah. No, go ahead.
what were you going to say?
Now, do you find that obviously adults come to you, but have you found young people trying to come to you, or somebody recommending young people to come to you?
I've had parents send their adolescents in, because I'm also certified to perform anger management for adolescent. I realize that, it's a skill, and they are still developing. Their brains are still developing. They're still insecure about life. There's so many things that are hindering them. And then to give them the skills, but then put them back in the same home
Mm,
where they're learning the behavior is
yeah, it's
useless.
tough. Yeah, that's tough.
So it really has to be a family intervention, not just the child.
Right. It's kind of, what
Unless the
I
child is
gathered.
removed from the
Yeah.
home or from the experience.
And it comes from the home. You know what? I notice a pattern when I used to watch a lot of television. I used to watch stuff like Super Nanny and even Dog Whisperer. You know, for the kids who are misbehaved, for the animals, the dogs who are misbehaved. Guess where the root problem was? It was the parents.
Yeah, it's the owners. It's the parents.
It's the owners and the parents that are really the root of the problem. Either they're too lenient or they're abusive. You know, either one.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're right.
Too
And,
passive or too controlling.
right. And, my whole thing is that I want to reach out to the young people, but you're right, if they have to go home and witness this. But I feel that for the older kids, they can arm themselves. If they know the difference, at least that's a beginning to know the difference, that it doesn't have to be this way. And they can carry that with them so they don't repeat it.
Yeah, it is. It's good to, I mean, intervention, education is helpful, but just think of that individual's mindset. I mean, the turmoil that they feel, because then, there's survivor's guilt. There's kids that will remove themselves from the environment because they can't take it anymore, but because they don't have the skills and the support, they get into even more danger and more vulnerable experiences. I mean, there's just so many levels of it, but I think education and, intervention wherever it's appropriate is really important. It's just good to know because, at least it's a start.
Well, I know that you're available, and we'll have all your connecting resources, your information below the video, but what would you say for people? They can just Google a certified anger management for their area, like their local area? Is that something they can do and reach out?
Yeah, it's really simple. Just Google anger management classes. Sometimes, a lot of times, I notice that churches will offer them for free if they need a safe place to go. But most anger management, anger management facilitators, you have to find the right ones, just like anything, a doctor or a coach or a therapist. You have to find a good fit. But when you do, it's so helpful.
Yeah, it's just like my original podcast show, Legal Advice in Paradise, and my book, Lawyer Up. It talks about that you wouldn't go to an attorney if you're trying to get a divorce. You're not going to go to a tax attorney, So there's a lot of therapists and even a doctor too that applies to this. So would you say the best thing to do is when they Google it, put anger management, certified anger management coach, or is that a good keyword, a certified?
Most people don't type that in. That's not the most common is just anger management classes, and then you have to ask, what's your certification? How long have you been certified? What's your specialty? Who do you prefer to work with? Because some people have life experiences that give them not just the theory that they learned in training, but the life experience of someone who may have been raped, and they are experiencing the anger of trying to live beyond that. There's been domestic violence, and they're experiencing the anger and want to heal from those experiences. So you want to know who has what type of experience and what their preferences in specializing, that they can relate to you.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I hear that a lot of women that work that help women in the women's shelter or domestic violence shelters, they've been through it themselves. So they are the best ones to really understand and have that empathy for you. And also, if they could come out of it and be survivors, they're a great example of that as well.
Yeah. Very inspiring. Yeah. And,
so
it really does. I mean, it's not necessary, but if you do have someone who has been through that and they have a relation and they can relate to your pain, it just, it makes it a little easier.
Yeah, because I can see where there's been people who have been abused and terribly so. Some cases are so much worse. I mean, there's so many horror stories of people almost near death because of it. And then for somebody who hasn't been through it, they cannot really relate. It would be difficult for them to relate. But anybody who will have a listening ear and stuff like that will help. But it really helps when you work with somebody who's been through it themselves.
Yeah, make an effort to find a good connection, because that could be the difference between you getting anger management or never coming back.
Exactly.
You understand?
Yeah, you could get discouraged and never go back.
And we're already in a vulnerable state, and the last thing we need is someone who doesn't get us and doesn't empathize, or just, you know, doesn't understand the dangers that we face.
Hmm. Well, I think we covered a lot. This is the
We
most I've
did, and I'm so
talked about
sorry I
anger.
lost you.
That's okay. I'm hoping that I bridged that little gap.
That would be great.
Well, and then, you know, everything that we can share with other people, any kind of information, to me, it's like opening a big door that you never thought. You have that aha moment in different areas of your life. And I just hope that these videos and interviews give you that aha moment to let you know that it doesn't have to remain this way if you're being, you know, abused and accosted all the time. It doesn't have to remain that way.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful to surround yourself with people who have lived it. They went through the divorce, they went through the separation, they went through, you know, all of the leaving and the fear and all of that stuff. Just surround yourself with people who can support you because they know what you've been through.
Yeah, and especially those who are moving forward. I know that some people have told me when I tell my stories that you keep living in the past. Well, I think studies have shown that if you talk about it, it's part of your therapy, as long as you don't go diving into some deep, dark place like depression because of it. Talking about it, that's why psychotherapy exists, right?
Exactly. Talk therapy is it's good. It's helpful. It's good to have someone who will listen to you and feel for you. So,
Mhm.
you know, don't be afraid to talk about it. Just be aware of who you're talking about it to.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, I want to thank you so much, Anutza, for your time and your expertise. It was a
Thank
challenge
you for having
to
me.
get to the interview,
It
but
was. Today was a challenge.
the forces that be didn't win. So we're bringing light on a dark situation, and we're
Yes.
likely to experience opposition, but the light is way stronger than any darkness. And I thank you so much for shining your light and your expertise and bringing awareness to people, because that's key. And it's not going to change overnight. Nothing does. If you've been experiencing this for years upon years, for me, decades, it's not going to happen overnight, but you have to take that first step. And the first step is being mentally aware that it doesn't have to be that way. And then the next step is to find out how, like for with Anutza said, how to manage that anger so that it doesn't
Yes.
get into the next generation and the next generation, and then the domino
Let's
effect at
break the
work.
chains.
Break the chain.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. And if you want to find out more about this campaign, you can find us on Facebook at End the Silence of Domestic Violence on Facebook. Also,
Good.
you can find these videos on Legal Advice in Paradise. And then if you really want to help out, please go to www.seedthebooks.org. And in return, you'll get some gifts from us for helping us with this campaign. It's a very grassroots campaign, but great things start really small, and that's that baby step. So Anutza, thank you so
Good
much
job.
again for your time.
Good job. You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and then we'll see you all out there again in the future. Aloha.